There are a lot of folks in the legacy auto industry that think that life is going to continue to go on as it has for the past 100 years, for at least the next decade or two, while the EV transition happens very slowly. They couldn't be more wrong, and Sandy Munro points out exactly why. Let's take a look. Hey y'all, it's Dr. Know-It-All. I'm going to play just a little 30-second clip that Sandy Munro is talking about with the new Audi E-Tron that he's reviewing, but you should definitely watch the entire video. I'll leave a link, of course, in the description so you can go check it out after you watch my video. So anyway, without further ado, here's that short clip.
I don't know what's going on with VW, but they need to change like right now. They need a giant upgrade. They need something that is not going to look like this old-fashioned car. I'm not throwing rocks at Audi. I'm giving warnings, and Volkswagen in general. You got to come up with something a whole lot better than this if you're going to make it in the market in the next generation.
So that's Sandy's warning to Audi and VW, which, you know, Audi is part of the VW group anyway. He is warning them that they need to up their game quickly in order to compete with newer vehicles, especially groups like Tesla, and of course also a lot of EV manufacturers out of China. And he even, you know, gives the Chevy Bolt a little bit of credit. I have not driven in a newer Chevy Bolt. The one that my brother has that's from 2017 or so or something like that, feels an awful lot like the one that Sandy is talking about here, although it does definitely have one pedal driving, which was really, really cool. So anyway, it's a good car. I mean, I definitely have enjoyed driving it when I've been out there, but it has a little of that crazy button interface thing that's, I don't know why all legacy auto feels like they need to have a million buttons. It sort of reminds me of the difference between the old like Casio watches that have like the 4 buttons and you never have any idea what combination of buttons actually make it work, versus something like this, an Apple Watch, which is much more intuitive. It kind of explains itself as you go. You get that sort of similar interface feel when you go back and forth between a Tesla and an older vehicle that has like that, all those buttons everywhere. I think that for years, legacy auto thought if they threw a whole bunch of buttons at people that they would think it was fancy. They're like, ooh, wow, look at all the stuff that this can do. But of course, the opposite is true. A more minimalist interface where things are self-explanatory and, you know, a more blank screen, again, like a phone or something like that, which is what Tesla has and which most modern EV-centric manufacturers are doing, the ones that are coming in from the ground up, like Lucid, Rivian, BYD, you know, et cetera, et cetera. So, you know, you pick your EV manufacturer from wherever that's thinking about this in a new way, and they're going more with that blank screen that can alter its behavior based on what needs the user has at that particular moment, and where many more things are exposed. You know, famously, the Tesla has the touchscreen, and then it has 2 scroll/press wheels on the steering wheel, and that's it. I guess you could include the stalk. There is the little button for, you know, doing all that kind of stuff. Okay, so there is that, but even that has been removed in the Model S and Model X, the new versions of that, which I have not driven very much. I've only driven them a couple of times, but you know, they're attempting to reduce and reduce and reduce the amount of stuff that's there. And of course, I'm firmly in the camp of minimalism shows good design. Like, you don't want extra stuff. If you have to have 3 buttons that do the same thing, then that's not a very good interface. And if you have hidden buttons, Sandy talks about paddles being hidden on the back, and I guess a button that's actually a rotating knob that's not a button. And actually, I'll give you an example of my Mazda CX-5, that it's a 2018, and it has this this kind of scroll wheel thing in the center console, and I didn't realize that it also acts as a 4-way push button, and I was, you know, struggling to figure out how to interface with something in Apple CarPlay, like the navigation screen. And I was like, why is this not working better? You know, and I was like, this is so frustrating. And then my wife actually goes, you know, you can push the button sideways to make it go and do these things too. And I was like, what? You know, that's just not an obvious interface element of this wheel thing. So anyway, you know, that's not good design. It's not exposed design. It doesn't tell you its functionality. If you want to go back and read a classic classic. You should read The Design of Everyday Things. This has really, really changed my life back in the 90s. When I read this book, I was like, oh. Just for a simple example, it's the kind of thing where if you walk up to a door and you don't know whether to push or pull it unless you read a sign that says push or pull, that's bad interface. If you have to have text to explain something, generally speaking, that's bad interface. It should have what's called affordances. It should look like something you pull. So a handle you should pull obviously should be something you can grasp and pull. And if you have to push it, that's really confusing for people, right? And then the push interface should be something more like a crash bar where you can push it and it's obvious that you push it to, you know, open the door that direction. So that's just a simple example of that, but people still get it wrong all the time. So design is not easy. You know, that's one of those things I think a lot of these legacy auto manufacturers are like, well, we have all of these different companies who manufacture these different buttons and they manufacture these different SoCs that we put integrated circuits that we can put in the car. And we have 100 of these things. And VW is famous for having so many of these. In fact, I talked to people working on the Trinity platform, and one of their major pushes is to reduce, I think they said 120 of these little ICs all over the car, to try to reduce that into something more centralized so they don't have these things and they have one more centralized sort of unit. Again, sort of like Tesla's Hardware 3 and upcoming Hardware 4, that sort of centralized control element, because they're not in charge of their own destiny. And so one of the reasons why they might have so many buttons is because you might have one audio manufacturing, you know, IC company that does just the audio portion of it, and so they have to have their own dedicated buttons. And then you have another group that's doing just the cruise control kind of thing, and another group that's doing the you know, enabling automatic emergency braking and traction control and all of this kind of stuff. So all of these things necessitate their own individual buttons because you've got way too many cooks in the kitchen and they all need their own thing. And so the result of this, plus the, you know, inability of the company itself to dictate things, to say like, no, we're going to reduce, we're going to simplify, we're going to make this more obvious and intuitive, results in something that's just a complete disaster. And that people, I guarantee you, there are people who drive these cars for years and don't know some of the functionality that's in there because they can't find it. It's not obvious. You know, nobody's going to sit down and read that gigantic manual that comes with all of these cars just to figure out that your interface control has an extra like paddle button on the back of the steering wheel that controls this other thing if you're in a certain mode or something. That's again like going back to those Casio watches where you had to go like, is it the combination of these two buttons and hold for 5 seconds or something like that? I have a dive computer that I've used up until this one that fortunately has a Bluetooth interface with my phone because I can't remember how to put it into certain modes and things like that. So it's just like, you know, you learn it and then you forget it because you don't use it for 6 or 8 months or something. And then you're like, so anyway, fortunately it has a phone app so I can Bluetooth connect it and I can talk. But it's kind of ridiculous that the affordances of these, you know, primitive devices are so poor, and legacy automobiles feel that way as well. And so what you end up with is a gas car, an ICE car, that just happens to have a battery in it, like Sandy says. I think that's a very good way of putting it. It just feels like an old primitive car that was designed in the 1990s or the early 2000s. It doesn't feel like a modern interface. And again, it goes back to the interface change. You could compare BlackBerry to iPhone and Android phone, that, you know, you have that old interface that seemed adequate with all the crazy buttons and all of that kind of stuff until the new paradigm came about. And then the old one just seemed like disastrously old. And then on top of that, Sandy actually starts the video out by going like, can you tell if this is an Audi or a Volkswagen ID4? Because they look pretty much identical from the side. You know, the fascia is different and it's got the Audi branding and everything, and it's much more expensive. But what he's discussing here is the classic mistake that GM especially, you know, because they have many brands. They have Buick and Chevrolet and GMC, etc. They have all of these brands, and in the 70s and 80s, what they did was they just took the same vehicle and they put different badging on it and stuff, and, you know, upgraded a few parts and things like that, and they called it a different vehicle. And so you could be driving a Cadillac and paying basically double of what a Chevrolet was, but basically the car was the same thing. And they thought that the consumer was dumb enough that they wouldn't notice. And Sandy is saying like, no, they are definitely smart enough to notice, and people are not going to want to overpay for an Audi when they could get an ID4 that looks pretty much identical to the Audi from the outside. So all in all, the problem for Volkswagen in particular, but also for most most legacy auto manufacturers is that they're being, let's call it lazy. They just want to like add batteries and an electric motor to a design that they already have instead of starting from a clean slate. And when you do that, when you have that sort of lazy design thing, you are radically open to disruption. Anybody who comes in with a better design than you and anybody who comes in with something that's really a new interface paradigm is going to just make you look ancient. And that's exactly what's going on with Volkswagen and Audi in particular here. But again, there are a lot of other auto manufacturers who aren't figuring this thing out. So the warning to these companies, and I don't know if they can still manage to get around this because it takes a long time to clean sheet design something, but they need to clean sheet design something. They need to just start from scratch. They need to strip out all of the old stuff. They need to start with a more integrated design where, you know, you take your 120 integrated circuits and you move those things into one centralized units with just a few extra things that are out there as satellite elements. You need to start from the ground up with batteries in mind. You know, the Volkswagens famously don't have frunks because they haven't figured out how to like replace all of the electronics. So that just shows the huge inefficiency of trying to cram an electric motor into a gas engine designed vehicle. And then of course you add on top of that the fact that they're being lazy and trying to put different fascia and different badging on top of the same vehicle, basically more or less. And also the fact that they still have a 1990s style interface to the vehicle. And you're looking at a trifecta of disaster just waiting to happen to Volkswagen. I don't know, quite frankly, if they're even going to be relevant players in 3 to 4 years unless the German government steps in and subsidizes them a whole bunch. And even if they do, I just don't know if they're fast enough to pivot quickly to be relevant. Now, they may still be in business, but they could be very much niche players at that point, which is really sad because they have a lot of electric vehicles on the market right now. But the problem is they had first mover advantage. And so it was them and Tesla in Europe. And so they could sell these vehicles even if they weren't very good. But the more competition that comes in, especially the Chinese competition that's coming in right now into Europe, is just completely slamming them. It's like, this is so much better than what Volkswagen has, that there's no sense for people to purchase a vehicle by Volkswagen because it's going to be a poor interface. Famously, the software doesn't work. People get very, very frustrated by the vehicle. Their experience is that they're paying too much money for a primitive style vehicle that doesn't work very well. And why not purchase something from Tesla or BYD or another company that gives them a better, more modern vehicle for the same or similar pricing? So of course, this is a warning to GM and Ford as well in the United States, and Stellantis. I don't know about Stellantis. They're their own thing. I think they're going the same route as Volkswagen here. I think that Ford and GM at least are looking towards the future and making an attempt at this, Ford especially. But Volkswagen is in a world of hurt. They and Toyota, crazily enough, the two biggest auto manufacturers from 2021, 2022, the last several years, the two biggest global powerhouses are pretty much doomed to failure and irrelevance in the next just very, very few years, because this is happening really, really quickly and they are not prepared for it. They think they can just sell to the consumer an ICE car that they just kind of slam some batteries and an electric motor into. That's not going to be the case anymore. It might have worked for a couple of years, but it's not going to work anymore because the competition is way too damn good. All right, I hope you enjoyed this video and found it fun and interesting and thought-provoking and perhaps a little anger-inducing. I don't know. It makes me angry that you see these giant behemoths that really should have been able to make this work on their own, but haven't been able to figure it out. Anyway, if you did enjoy the video, please do like it so other people can find it. And of course, consider subscribing for more of this kind of content. As always, a huge shout out to my patrons on Patreon. Thank you all so much for your support. I truly do appreciate it. And if you want to join the team, just check out the link in the description. And if you're interested in a whole bunch of really cool merch, check out our merch store. Link is in the description. We have TeslaBot t-shirts, the Tesla meme t-shirt, Success is a Possible Outcome, 4680 battery cells. All of that stuff is on t-shirts, mugs, tumblers, and on. So check it out. And finally, don't forget we are both Tesla and Amazon affiliates. If you look in the description, you can see how going shopping for a solar roof, a power wall, or anything on Amazon helps out the channel. In the meantime, I'll see you in the next one. Bye-bye.